Merchants of Death, which is a positive name that I think they definitely endorse, right? I think it's actually Raytheon's slogan, right? Isn't it? Raytheon, come to us. Jeffrey Sachs, and I'm going to break it down as we go because he has a bunch of amazing points as he goes. Jeffrey Sachs is a professor in at Columbia, economics professor, does other things as well. I think he also has maybe a best-selling book or something. But the U.S. state does not like Professor Jeffrey Sachs, and you're about to see why.
U.S. politics is basically a plutocratic state where public policy has been taken over by several powerful lobbies.
By the way, plutocratic, I mean, most of you know, but it means ruled by the wealthy. And so it's undeniable. I mean, he's not saying something tricky when he says plutocratic. No, our Congress people, they don't have much money. What about in the House? In the House of Representatives, you have a lot of people making $7 an hour. It's like, no, it is literally ruled by the wealthy. You cannot argue that it's not ruled by the wealthy.
Each one devoted to its specific area. And they keep the control over U.S. policy through campaign contributions, because our election campaigns are funded by billionaires and by corporate lobbies. And they cost about $15 billion now for an election cycle. And you may have seen.
That's not an exaggeration. The last election cycle was $15 or $16 billion was spent. And that just counts, ads and things like that. It does not count what's called earned media, which, every time Trump farts, they do a story on CNN, right? Well, that didn't cost Trump anything. He doesn't pay for that. He gets earned media because he farted. And so the 15 billion number does not even count all of the endless media coverage that these candidates get on only in the two corporate parties, right? They're not going to cover anyone else, basically, that these candidates get for just existing. So the 15 billion is just the ads, etc., that are used to buy and also paying, people to go out and hand out leaflets and all that shit. $15 billion in election cycle. To put that in perspective, I remember that in one election cycle, Adelson, who spent $100 million, which at the time might have been a record for an election cycle, he himself, luckily he's dead now, but his wife continues in his honor, in his memory. Adelson spent $100 million on an election cycle, which was the same amount that the entire Labour Party in Britain spent for one of their election cycles. One guy in America spent the same as the entire one of the two biggest parties in Britain spent on their entire election cycle. That's the difference.
George Soros yesterday said, I give my empire to my son. And the son said, I'm going to fund the Democratic Party. Well, that's the billionaires that he'll put in hundreds of millions of dollars. $1 billion would not be surprising in the 2024 election. And then there are other billionaires. And so what are the lobbies? Wall Street controls financial policy, and our health lobby controls our unbelievably expensive private so-called health system.
Yeah, so-called health system, which should be a crime against humanity. I mean, when you destroy so many lives with a healthcare system, it shouldn't be called a healthcare system anymore. It should be called our for-profit crime against humanity. I mean, it's just so harmful. The number of people some people don't get certain treatments because they can't afford it. So that happens a lot. Some people just have their lives and their bank accounts destroyed because they can't afford it. That happens a lot. But the number of people who just don't go to the doctor because they can't afford it and therefore die far earlier because they can't afford it that's not even counted, right? That's in these statistics. The number of people that are just like, I ain't going to the fucking doctor. You out of your mind? Why? That's like raising your hand and being like, I'd like to go visit a guy who's going to rob me. Are there any thieves in the neighborhood? I can go hang out with and just kind of leave my wallet dangling out of my pocket? Is there anyone like that I could, oh, this guy, he's killed a guy and stole his phone. He killed a guy for his phone. I'm going to go hang out with him. That's many people view going to the doctor as basically that. I'm going to go to a thief. And we're the only developed country that's anywhere near like this.
And our ag lobby controls the food industry with about 60% obesity or overweight in the United States.
And it talks about the obesity, but of course, to me, and yeah, that's incredibly harmful, but that is not the biggest harm of big ag. But I'm glad he's mentioning it at all, because most people that even talk about these subjects, many of them will leave out the big ag industry as if it's not a player, but it is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, polluter in the world, cause of the climate crisis, cause of the destruction of our land, the destruction of our forests, the destruction of our animals. It's just horrific, the harm that is done to our world in the name of big ag. And yet it's rarely mentioned, even rarely mentioned by a lot of independent media. We just leave it out as if it's not incredibly harmful.
Another huge, very serious public health crisis. And the military industrial complex controls foreign policy, not just military policy, foreign policy.
Now, that one's a little upsetting, because I don't know why he had to throw the military industrial complex into this. They are good people trying to help the world, trying to bring democracy and freedom to the countries around the world. That's what they are. And the fact that he would include them in here, it's very upsetting. Very upsetting. The military industrial complex, they are trying to bring democracy to Ukraine, where just 2 days ago, Zelensky announced there would be no more democracy. I covered it on the last live stream, which I call a live scream because I do often scream. Zelensky announced that there would be no elections until they defeat Russia. So any day now, I'm sure they will defeat Russia, and then he will allow democracy again. But until then, no democracy. So we're fighting in Ukraine to bring democracy with no democracy, which is an interesting tactic.
So we have perpetual war and trillion-dollar military budgets, 900 billion in the Pentagon budget, but there's a lot more. There's the CIA and there's Homeland Security, and there are many other categories, Department of Energy with nuclear weapons and so on. It's maybe $1.2 trillion a year.
So many people don't mention that aspect either, that it is well over $1 trillion once you include the CIA, the intelligence agencies, et cetera, et cetera. I've also heard people that when you factor it all in, you get up to closer to $1.6 trillion. He's saying 1.2. But you know, who's going to argue over pennies, right? 1.2 trillion, 1.6 trillion. What's the difference? It's a couple of cents. You know what? I got it. No, I insist. I get this one. $4 trillion. I mean, $0.4 trillion. I got it. This one's on me.
So that's on the spending side. On the revenue side, we have unanimous agreement among the billionaires. Don't tax us. It's very simple. So we have a low tax collection in the United States, and this spending on the military, for example, which has cost about $6 trillion in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and some of the other wars. $6 trillion.
So he says it costs $6 trillion, but keep in mind that most of that is going into the pockets of our military contractors and weapons contractors. So, you know, it's a little disingenuous to say it costs us. It goes to great people. It goes to weapons contractors. It goes to war profiteers. It goes to merchants of death, which is a positive name that I think they definitely endorse, right? I think it's actually Raytheon's slogan, right? Isn't it? Raytheon, come to us for merchants of death. Isn't that? I think I'm getting that right. It's either that or Build Back Better. I can't remember. It's one of those. It's either we are your merchants of death or by Menon. It's one of those. I can't remember which one.
It's a lot, by the way. Starts to add up a little bit. And so our debt crisis comes from a broken political system. It's not so interesting, Democrats and Republicans, by the way. It's a little bit a children's game. The oligarchy.
I love that line because you'll see people criticize these things, but often not say the next step, which is so the Democrat Republican thing is childish. It's silly. You have an agreement amongst the ruling elite on most of these issues. So the whole bickering between Democrat and Republican, yeah, there's occasionally something small here or there, but in general, it's a children's game. Absolutely a children's game. And that's what we should call it. We should call it a children's game. And that's why I think you should get out of that two-party system, that two-party bullshit, and support a literal rock that I found in my yard. Yardrock2024.com. I think you should.
Oligarchy is the plutocracy is both parties. And I lost interest in the because it's basically a game that is below our intelligence. And this is our problem. Now we will have riots.
By the way, most viral post I ever put up was back during the 2016 election. I just stood there holding a sign that said this election is below our intelligence. And it got millions and millions of views around the world because everyone knew it was true. That's why.
Rising debt in the future. It's a big country, big economy. We can spend a lot on wars. There's been no public debate for a moment on the 120 billion that has been spent so far. This has all been just bits and pieces inside omnibus legislation. So we can't get a debate on anything because there is no debate.
He's talking, of course, about, I think they cut out the part of it, but he's talking, of course, about the 120 billion sent to Ukraine. There's been basically no debate. I mean, there's no real debate in your mainstream media. Those who try and debate it or say something about it are drummed out immediately and not allowed back on. So there's no real debate on the $120 billion that has been sent to Ukraine, much of it into the hands of Nazis with literal swastikas on their helmets and on their flags. So yeah, it's not debate. But then again, what does debate matter in America? Why should we have a say? You know, why should anyone have a say except for the incredibly rich people that are allowed into those ivory towers? Why should, who are you or me to have any say on how our country is governed, right? It should just be the rich sociopaths that should really control things and tell us how we should feel.
There'll have to be another appropriation for Ukraine. They'll try to put it in a must-pass bill so that it's not really debated and can just be snuck in, because there's no interest in asking the American people anything about any of this. There's no attempt at deliberative democracy at all.
Yeah. I think that's another great point. Is there's no interest. There's no want of your ruling elite, of the people in those hallowed halls, to actually turn to Americans and get our opinion. Everything is designed to make sure we don't have an opinion. We don't have a say. That is how the system is set up, is to try and minimize our say in this system.